The Porter Cable is a good dovetail jig, and with a few easy improvements it can be turned into a great dovetail jig so that you'll get consistent results. I won't repeat everything that's in the instruction book. I'm only going to show you the improvements I made. There was a large label stuck on the front here, so I removed that in order that the piece of wood here can get a consistent flat surface to rest against. This black bracket registers the side and end pieces in their correct positions. It's adjustable with this screw. The problem I found though is that when I got it in the right position, tightened this screw, it would still wiggle up here. So I drilled another hole, tapped the base, and put a second screw in so that it won't wiggle. These brass rings control the position of the template. What I found is they would move a little bit each time I put the template off and on. So I added another hex nut behind and I locked that to the brass ring when they're in the right position. These two knobs adjust the tightness of the clamp, and I adjust them so that with a scrap of wood the same thickness as what I'll be working on, the clamp moves to the same position under either one of the cams. Then I know I've got an even pressure. Same idea on the top clamp. And I've labeled the jig to remind me which piece of the drawer goes on the top, which piece goes on the side, and that they're to go inside out. I joint, plane, and cut the pieces of wood just before I'm going to do the dovetail joints so that they don't have a chance to warp or anything like that. Then I orient them the way I want them for the grain, and then mark the inside corners with letters, say A, B, C, D. And I put that marking at the bottom, so that'll help me later where to cut the groove. As I'm cutting the pieces of wood, before I get to the final length, I check that my saw is set up to give a perfectly square cut. If I do have to interrupt my workflow and leave the freshly jointed and planed stock aside for a bit, then I clamp it between spacers to reduce any warpage, and I try and do that for no more than a couple hours. Placing the wood in the jig is also critical. I'm matching the letters here, and I've got the side piece roughly clamped in position so that I can register the end piece against it. Then I tighten the clamp. And if the piece is quite narrow here and the clamp is rocking, then I could slip a scrap of the same thickness under here to get uniform clamping pressure. With this piece in place, I can now set the finger jig on top. I'll use the finger jig as a kind of clamp by pushing down on it as I tighten to further stabilize this piece. Now I can move the side piece up to be even with the end piece. I'm going by feel here. I adjusted the brass knobs to their correct position while the finger jig was mounted with boards in place and adjusted so that I would get a consistent distance across here. And once they're adjusted and locked in with the hex nuts, then I don't need to change them again. Now this side piece still has some movement to it. So I made this big block of wood, which has a couple of holes drilled in the ends, and it slips in the back here. Then I can clamp against that big block of wood, another piece of wood here, and pull that in so there's no wiggle there at all. Now I'm ready to route with complete stability and with both pieces of wood registered against this black bracket. And if I want to double check, I can use a ruler to confirm there's exactly 1/2 inch distance between those two pieces of wood. With a tall drawer, I use this block that has a space cut out so that I get pressure on both ends of the piece of wood. I'm wiping the base of the router, and I'm wiping the finger template guide with a lubricant. In this case I'm using DuPont Chain Saver, but table saw slippery lubricant would be good too. And that's just so that I get smooth movement. I'll take a first light pass just horizontally so that when I do the cutting in I don't get tear out. And be careful you don't go too far to the left because your router bit will hit the bracket here, which you can see I did once. And next thing I'll do is cut the fingers left to right and then go back right to left. And as I go, I'll hug the edges of the template as if you were flossing your teeth, getting both edges. And that makes sure I get a full cutout. And you never want to lift the router out because you'll just tear up the wood. So you got to pull it away, let it come to a stop. And now the moment of truth. These pieces should be the same height, which they are. Don't expect to get it this perfect on your first try. Even if you've done all the tricks that I showed you, you still need to adjust the router bit depth of cut, and you need to adjust the brass rings to get the good fit. And so you'll need to work with scraps of wood and try half a dozen times to get it the way you like. And I've gone with a dedicated router with the bushing and bit. I leave it in place all the time. So once I set it, I've never had to adjust it again. And even as the thickness of the pieces of wood change, that doesn't need to change. To ensure the drawer comes out to the precise dimensions after it's glued and clamped, I made these spacers which go inside the drawer, because for the Blum drawer slides that I'm using, they require that the inside dimension be 42 millimeters less than the cabinet width. So I put 2 of these spacers in each of the end, then I can clamp it together and everything will come out the correct dimension. Here's the glue up with 8 clamps. You can see the spacers at both ends, and they're on the bottom as well. And I slipped in a diagonal piece here to bring the cabinet square. So there's the drawer glued up. I can either sand this smooth, or I can take a sharp hand plane and plane in this direction.